So hello from the galleries at Moore College of Art and Design, and welcome to our virtual program this evening. My name is Alicia Tomzewski, and I'm the Education and Public Engagement Coordinator here in the galleries. Tonight, we will be screening Alicia Griot's Please Don't Let It Be Too Close, a film commissioned by Spaces in Cleveland, Ohio, which looks at the lead up to the 2020 elections from the point of view of workers and the worries that were tying them together. Following the film, Chief Academic Officer Lynne Tomzewski, who is here with us this evening, will join Alicia Griot in conversation. We've set aside a little bit of time for questions from the audience at the end, so I encourage you to go ahead and submit any comments or questions that you have to the Q&A box. And I will be helping to facilitate those questions at a later point in the program. But before we get started, I would like to introduce both of our speakers tonight. Alicia Griot is an artist, activist, and scholar from and based in New York City, whose ongoing embodied research focuses on activating public spaces to prioritize healing and archiving oral history in order to disrupt historical patterns that undermine the health and civic participation of BIPOC peoples. Alicia's work has been shown in numerous group exhibitions, including the 8th Floor, Bronx Museum of the Arts, Brick House for Arts and Media, School of Visual Arts, El Museo del Barrio, Columbia University, Socrates Sculpture Park, Performa 11, Old Stone House, and Art in Odd Places. She has participated in residencies with Hemispheric Institute for Politics and Performance at New York University, Center for Book Arts, and the Bronx Museum of Art, among others. She received a BFA from Tisch School of the Arts at New York University, an MFA from the State University of New York at New Paltz, and has done doctoral coursework in art and art education at the Teachers College at Columbia University. Alicia is also the 2020 recipient of the Jane and David Wallentis Endowed Fellowship. This is a prestigious award that was launched in 2019 that underscores the college's ongoing commitment to social engagement by offering opportunities to artists who bring their creative vision for the future of cultural production to the Moore community, as well as the larger artistic community of Philadelphia. Her exhibition from March to June at Home with Essential Workers is currently on view in the galleries. Lynne Tomzewski is the Chief Academic Officer at Moore College of Art and Design. Before coming to us at Moore, Lynn served as Director of the School of Art and Art History in the College of the Arts at the University of Florida. She has previously served as an Associate Dean of Graduate Studies at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and Chair of Foundations at the Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design, where she was also on the faculty for 16 years. Lynn is also an interdisciplinary artist whose conceptually driven visual practice explores how technology facilitates and alters perception. Her paintings, drawings, coding, and video work often involve the accumulation of images or actions into unified perceptual fields. Her work has been nationally and internationally exhibited in over 85 solo and group shows. Lynn has an MFA in printmaking from the San Francisco Art Institute and a BFA in studio art from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. All right, so welcome back, everyone. In case you logged on a bit later in the program, I'd like to quickly reintroduce myself and our speakers. My name is Alicia Tomzewski, and I'm the Public Engagement Coordinator for the galleries at Moore. And we've just wrapped up the screening of artist Alicia Griot's film, Please Don't Let It Be Too Close. And I am here with both Alicia and Moore's Chief Academic Officer, Lynne Tomzewski, who will now lead us in a dialogue about the film. And just a reminder to you all, if you have any questions for Alicia, please go ahead and submit them to the Q&A. So with that, I will turn it over to Lynn and Alicia.
Thank you, Leah. And thank you, Alicia, for allowing us to screen this amazing film and for taking the time to talk to us today. It's really incredible. Every time I see it, I see something different. So I'm just going to start with the thing I want to ask you the most. So there's a section in the film, right, kind of in the middle at like the 28-minute mark, where it's black and white, and the pundit is talking about sort of how we got here and how the extreme right has benefited, and you're acting out different occupations with animal figures on, that section. And then it really masterfully is followed by the Kimberly Guilfoyle's speech that you embody, and I think you're doing it in front of the Charlie Chaplin film. And then it cuts to your conversation with Laura Raycon on Zoom, sort of, that. So it's these three different kinds of approaches around process. And can you talk about your process and how you decide? I mean, there's so much in the film and there's so many different methods. And can you talk about, how you decide? It seems like that's really the kind of moment where all of the ways we got here are sort of unpacked. But it's such a interesting performative move that you do that's really different than many of like the first person narratives and the stories that you're also performing.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for the question. The video on a whole was based on interviews that I did with residents from the Midwest. So before 2020, about 2018, I had gotten this nominated and become a resident. So I just want to give everyone a kind of a background of the whole film, so that Lynn's question, so you know how we build to Lynn's question to that moment in the video that is startlingly different than the rest of it, which is based on my reenactment of interviews that I did with people out in the Midwest. And I was originally supposed to be in Cleveland for a month doing the same thing, but specifically with people from Cleveland about the 2020 elections. And so that was planned in 2018. And then all of a sudden 2020 is here and we have quarantine. So, the great thing about, proposing to do the residency virtually is that I got to speak to a wider population in the Midwest. And so those reenactments where you see me speaking, they're reenactments of interviews that I did with people, and some other ones in there are of folks here. No, I take that back. I think it was the very first clip was one of someone here in New York, that very first clip. But the rest of it is just based on interviews with Midwesterners and their opinion on the election. And there was a moment, I guess, when I got to that point, because in an odd way, I'm also documenting my life here in quarantine and the things that I listened to and the things that I was reading, researching, and how does all that get told into this story? Because I am in my home, and it's a lot different than I would have imagined it to be, because I was initially going to be in Cleveland in residency and creating the video on site, and I wasn't thinking that we were going to be in the middle of a pandemic and that George Floyd was going to die. All these things happened in the course of making this project, and it being very specific to the places that we are. And I was here in New York City. So the pundit, was just from an interview that I listened to that I felt that laid out the questions that we did have of the economy and of society, the society that we've built. So, and how much the worker is at the center of these conversations, and particularly thinking of essential workers and the whole series, because I was doing that series at the same time as I was researching this video. So the workers their presence stood out. And I was reading, I had my daughter read Animal Farm because she needed summer reading. So she likes animals. That's right. She's 11. So I gave her Animal Farm to read. And at the same time, we would kind of discuss it. And I hadn't read that book since I was 13 or yeah, that's when we read it in the 8th grade. So for me, it was the visual representation of the characters in Animal Farm stood out a lot to me, revisiting that and revisiting how the disenchanted workers rebelled against the farmer. And then at the end, they were these splinter groups. And my imagination just ran with that imagery of how to describe almost the nonsensical and unrealistic conditions that workers are under, and hence the animal heads, and acting out these activities in space while the pundit talks about the conditions of workers here and well, what has led to them be in such kind of dire conditions if you think about and you measure it up against the wealth that we have as a country. So that's how that bit came up, how to kind of encapsulate all these really intense feelings without going into a dissertation and writing like a 30-page paper in about 2 or 3 minutes, which is kind of long as well for video, but how to do that while listening to what this man was saying, and trying to make sense. A lot of the video is kind of jarring and kind of stops and goes, and that's just more reflective of this experience, this 2020 experience, how very few things flowed, right, in 2020. So like segueing from that into Guilfoy's speech, which was a moment of such extreme absurdity. It was so surreal, the real thing, and listening to the real thing and looking at the real thing. It was theater, in a way that I'm still shocked by, thus it inspired my acting it out and how I did, but these moments seem to define, not for everyone, and I can't say it defines us as a society, but there were these moments of absurdity at the conditions where we were in that brought me to question, why aren't we still solving these problems when we're given the opportunity to do so? We're stuck in these moments of absurdity, and kind of locked in and not being able to get out of the theater of it all. And it's kind of peppered with Tom Cruise and our enamored opinions and about Hollywood. Hollywood has played such a huge role in U.S. society.
It's kind of interesting I don't want to stop you from your train of thought too.
No, please, because I'll just keep going.
That's really fascinating too, because it was a perfect sort of, I understood it, but I didn't understand, it was so absurd that, but it's so different to compare like your earlier work where you performed, what was the senator, her filibuster around the
Wendy
abortion
Davis
laws in Texas. Yeah. Which now, that looks tame, compared to what happened in Texas, in the Supreme Court, this was it this week, last week? But that gave, like, your performance of that piece gave that more light and more space and just kind of an empathy to it. But then to treat Kimberly Guilfoyle's speech in the same way would have been, not not appropriate, and sort of treated as an avatar, and you know, oh no.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Did I get kicked out?
And also, as I, all the Googling we did during the pandemic, there was really, people were really doing these Kimberly Guilfoyle challenges.
Oh,
after the real thing. That was a hilarious moment on just watching YouTube videos of people, or
reenacting
Instagram or TikTok. Yeah, reenacting or really doing the voiceover. But that was really fun. That was a fun discovery. So that was,
and it was
my doing it was also inspired by that.
Yeah, but it was a release too, because it was such a heavy part of the video that, it was really masterful. I love that part. You talked about this a little bit of the way that this project with spaces was planned, and then the way it actually was executed was very different. And so that was my other question, is you often do very site-specific projects, and this certainly was site-specific in the Midwest, but do you feel like having to perform this in your domestic space changed the way that either you performed it, or the way it's received, or even the way you brought up, the access to the Midwestern interviews, and maybe because they were done differently? How did that
funny, access
affect
it's
any?
really, it's really quite different from the photographs, from the images of the essential workers, where you actually see parts of my house.
Mm-hmm.
And in these videos, adapting to the interviews so that they would resemble more of how we did them, which was in a Zoom situation. But it was visually different in capturing my home. But how was it different than doing it at home than if I were doing it in a studio? I think that it was just the circumstances made it different, because I would not have made this piece had it not been for the pandemic in the way that it came out. So that is the influence of my home. It would have, I had imagined it to be different altogether. And having to adapt to these constraints was, and constraints, I don't mean in a bad way. We could think of it more like in a fluxus way, like these set of rules.
Right.
Was fun, in a sense. Fun, I use it lightly, but it kept me more curious about how things would change based on these structures that life was providing right now. So, I mean, shooting schedule, things that you wouldn't notice from seeing the film, I guess more of the backstage thing, being at home, quick changes between things, having a tight schedule because everyone was home. So there were these tight schedules of filming that I had, because I needed quiet. Those kind of things come through, but that's me knowing what is occurring. At the same time, I wanted the images, or at least those videos of where the reenactments were, to maybe not be so specific to my home, and be able to fit a variety of different homes. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Yeah, no, I think talking about your process and how the interviews came about, and it kind of answers the other question I had of the sequence after the Kimberly Guilfoyle. Sorry, it's a really hard name to say.
Guilfoyle. Well, the interviews with those were almost interruptions of reality. Those are the most. I wasn't reenacting. I was really having these conversations with these great women whose work I admire. Right, a few days right after the election. So you'll notice it's like November November
4th,
3rd,
I think, yeah.
November 4th, 7th, and 11th. So it was,
Okay.
and I planned that on purpose. I said, here's some dates. I want to talk to you right after these elections. And this is what it's for. And those are almost breaks. Those were breaks, like inspired by like a kind of like the chorus in Greek plays, these reality checks in the middle of all this, of all the acting or all the reenactments or all, even the video, the document, the snapshots from our phones or the memes, all that,
Right.
creating our imagination, our imaginary spaces, but our physical space as well. So I saw those 3 moments and I wanted to put them at the end to preserve a timeline of sorts, because I mean, up until the very end, we had January 6th then happen. So
Yeah.
it was catching up and keeping it relevant to this. The elections for me weren't over, January 6th was like the last, like that's when the elections ended.
Yeah.
And so yeah, those specific interviews were just to keep a chronology of time, that timeline, and having them back to back rather than interspersing them within the video at different moments, which are read differently, would have perhaps left the timeline more ambiguous. But for me, I wanted that chorus at the end to start like snapping us a little bit out of the haze that we were in.
Right. Like
Kind
the
of like the
constant
protests.
stimulation that we were all,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, absolutely. The protests were like this quick, a break of the haze. I mean, I remember when they started in late May, everyone just burst out of their homes.
And it wasn't safe, but yeah,
It wasn't safe.
It had to
and
happen.
and the rates of contagion of contact, from what I've read, were kind of low in outside when people were protesting, because people were out. So, which was interesting. But it was that, again, that burst of from the haze of all the injustices, because George Floyd's murder was that's what just broke and exhausted everyone, because right before that we had Ahmaud Arbery, we had a bunch of other deaths, and then on top of it, the injustices of who was dying in the middle of this pandemic specifically, and why. I think it that's why people burst out, wanting to do something, right? Because we were all kind of stuck. So that was that in itself was a moment in itself of the chorus, but at the same time, they were moments of hyper realism that was in contrast to the absurdity, of just having the interviews and the names, specifically the names of the people who died, that was on the screen, of all the people who were killed by police violence in 2020, Black and brown people specifically. Those were the names on the screen. Over the voiceover of the FDP protests in New York, the human rights video coverage, Democracy Now, and the other peppered interviews. So the names are this hyper real moment of soberness, that we got.
It just, I was thinking about when I saw the photographs that are in the at home show at Moore, that it's work that is going to look very different in a different time, as we look at those, I think, so it, and so I guess I have just kind of a general question about, I think when you did the reenactment performance pieces where you inserted yourself in costume into the Battle of Brooklyn, right? You know, that you said about those pieces something, I'm paraphrasing, so I don't mean to misquote you, but you said it, so you can correct me. But you were inserting the future into the past, you know, as a way to just you were bringing things from the contemporary life on your person, so that you reminded yourself you're in the contemporary, but you wanted to participate in a past that didn't include you and insert your body there. And so thinking about that, it struck me that maybe this piece is sort of looking at the past and how it got us here. You know, like there are all these moments of like, you know, we should have seen it coming. You know, it's a racist, it's always been a racist country. Our wealth is founded on the free labor of Black people mainly, but brown people also still. And, you know, so it seems like you're doing something similar with time but you're holding us right in the moment, but then pulling in all of these, you know, touch points or markers or signals about reminding us how this wasn't a moment that just happened out of nowhere, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. No, absolutely. And it peppering that throughout, that reminder, in order to enable us to be able to step back. That's one of the why those quick clips or symbols within the video were important. They were reminders of of the reasons why this is happening. You know, our lived experiences, our collective experiences, and the questions of how different would it have been. You know, you just brought up the Battle of Brooklyn, and yeah, in my shoes, I had become part of an annual reenactment of a Battle of Brooklyn that occurs in Brooklyn, celebrating one of the few battles of the Revolutionary War that occurred in New York City. Thus, the Battle of Brooklyn that was lost by the militia, the U.S. militia, against the British, and it was pretty much like an open call for come fight this day. We had, you know, just bring a musket and a good pair of shoes and a canteen. So I joined the reenactment in much the same way. You know, I borrowed a costume from the old stone house in Brooklyn, borrowed a musket and a canteen, a good pair of shoes. So followed those instructions, and, you know, obviously there was some introductions before the actual day that I would be there, with a photographer following me, and documenting me as I went along. And in my shoes, there was this idea of questioning history and looking back, but we're looking back with the knowledge that we have now in the future. So how would this knowledge affect the way that we look at the past, the way that we understand and analyze the past as we're retelling these stories, as we're retelling history in order to make it accurate? And for that performance, I carried in my shoe the open letter of the Ferguson protesters' open letter from 2014, and then in the other shoe, the Red Nation's 21-point manifesto from 1977, as a way of bringing these two rebellions back into the American Revolution, to this reenactment. Like how different does it inform my being there? It informed it completely different, in the conversations that I was having with different groups of people that day. So yeah, the video follows that idea, without the interaction with people, but having the past constantly present, in order for us to be able to ask the questions and analyze how much things would have changed.
Yeah. So the methodology is running through both endeavors, but in different ways. Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah. And the other, question I have, and I've seen the film a couple of times, and I love that you begin with art. You start at the early in the film talking about what you were reading, the parable of the sower, and it ends with you getting back to that and then reading the play about the hope that the American dream, that we were all different, but we would be unified, and the myth of the melting pot, kind of in the net comes out in the narrative of the character that was speaking at the end. But obviously the insurrection is overlaid on that, and it ends in flame. So is that a hopeful ending? It is, I love the way it asks all of these things and does all of these things at once. But, can you talk about your decision to end with art? And, is art our way through this, or, can you talk about that ending on that note
sure.
in a way?
For sure. It's funny. I often talk to my students about this. What is the purpose of art now, or what is the purpose of art and artists? Like, why are we here? And sometimes you draw the conclusion that is to ask the difficult questions. That's part of our labor, is to ask the hard questions, or the questions that perhaps others may not consider. And it's probably because as artists we have this different point of view. Sometimes we will just look at a situation differently. It's part of our training, it's part of our way of seeing. And I was reading a lot, but I was reading in a kind of a staccato fashion. Like I would pick up a book, put it down, pick up another book, because it's just reflective of that period of time. And there were so many things that became so much more relevant. So yes, it was the parable of the sower that I haven't finished reading. Actually, I had to put it down. And then the other one was Laurie Susan Parks, who wrote this play, 100 Plays for the First 100 Days. She did that when Trump was elected. So she, for 100 days, wrote a play, a short play. And some of it is really funny, and very, very abstract, very not a type of play that we would relate to when we're thinking about 5 acts and different storytelling techniques, where you go to the climax of the play, and then you come down denouement, and then the ending. It doesn't follow that structure at all. It's very short snippets of 100 days, and you can tell when she's watching the news, and you can tell when she's watching a press release or a news brief that the president had given those 100 days. And it seemed like we were right at January 6th. I didn't shoot that video piece and made that decision on January 6th. It was a few days after, but Biden's 100 days had started. So for me, it seemed, and that's actually Susan Laurie Parks in her actual epilogue of the collection of plays. At the very end, it's her. It's actually her, I'm assuming, sharing the story.
To speak.
Yeah, exactly. Assuming from the clues that given in the narrative that it was her own experience she was writing about as she was on her way to give a lecture.
Just describing, our broken infrastructure too, and how absurd it is.
Yeah, it is. It really is. And then at the same time, within that, there's so much. Our hope has to rest on us, right? Our hope has to rest on our exchanges and our interactions how we relate to each other. That's where the hope is for any change whatsoever. And I think that was her point. And at the same time that it's a great way to see reality, that hope rests in us, which it does. And at the same time, there's a question to it. Will it be possible? Will we be able to actually meet that requirement of our being the hope for any type of change? And that's, I guess, a question that I have. It's a question mark, and I purposely end her speaking not at a resolve, but more with a question. It sort of tapers off, and you're not sure whether she finished or not. And that was a choice I made because that's how I feel. I don't know, what she's saying makes sense. It really does. And at the same time, looking around us, looking at how things are working, it almost seems like it's not attainable,
Right.
just yet.
And we've all said it before, especially implicating us white people, of diversity is a good thing, and especially white liberals, and how dangerous that sort of framing of the situation can be without each individual sort of taking on whatever that framing that brought us to the way we move through the world, with power, without power. And it's a great way to end. What about the music? Why Queen and why Elton John? And
kind of old, but it was mostly for the lyrics. It was mostly mostly for the lyrics and asking. Particularly with the first one, when we're looking at candidates, it becomes this ridiculous short love story.
Right.
I think you really just want someone to like you enough to vote for you, regardless of what it is that you're representing or what you will do or not do. So that it's a little bit tongue in cheek with them. And the fireworks, it's so,
Americana. Yeah.
It is. It really is. And
and such a cleaned up version of our violence that,
the fireworks.
Yeah,
a piece of Chinese technology. Yes.
right.
On top of it. Yep. And then like the ending is just that song that burned down the mission. And I think this was right along the thinking of just being on stolen land, on indigenous land, and now with the children, children's remains being found. It's the song itself. It's one of his more political ones that hasn't gotten a lot of play. Particularly when you read the lyrics, he's just talking about literally, the mission, burning down what the mission stands for, and explains in other verses of the song the reasons why, the rich man behind the walls, and the workers outside. It's just a very interesting song, a choice for Sir Elton John. But seem relevant to end with it for me, is to end on a.
Because it doesn't sound, like high art. It's so populous too, that anyone growing up with a radio, and certainly in North America, would have heard it, and probably all of Europe would have heard it. And
maybe, I wonder how much play it got. Absolutely. And it is, in film itself, it's popular art, right? A lot of our first exposure for many of us is our film. Right? It's film or video. If it's not music, if it's not something else, but for me, I think it's at least one of the mediums that I identified the most with. That moving image. It's popular culture. Why not end it and also put popular culture, although dated?
Yeah. Excellent. Well, I don't know if we have any audience participation, but maybe we can bring Leah back and see if there's any, if the audience has any questions. I can't see, this is the weird virtual format.
We don't have anything from the audience at this time, but I have a question actually.
Yeah.
If I pose it to Alicia. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about your approach to performance generally. So you're enacting the words of people who are often underrepresented or misrepresented. So what's happening when you sort of adopt these personas? And I mentioned in my introduction to you this idea of embodied research. So are you drawing a distinction between representation and embodiment?
Am I drawing a distinction between representation and embodiment? That's a great question, Leah, that I hadn't thought of before, to be honest. I'm not. I mean, going back to the question that I'm asked when I think about Wendy Davis, like I'm not embodying her, because I'm well aware of the semiotic differences between Wendy Davis and me. So I always emphasize reenactment. So I would say that in these situations, it is a reenactment, particularly of a reenactment of how the stories are told to me. So paying attention to how the people on, that I interviewed, how they tell their stories to me, and looking at their gestures and social cues and cadences, speech patterns, and trying to replicate them in the best way I can. And at the same time, being aware that I'm the storyteller. So the storyteller is always present, or else the work doesn't or else the work, the reenactment, the acting won't resonate if there's no personal connection. That's what I learned in acting school. So to answer your question, on the spot, I would say probably really want to emphasize the reenactment part, and not representational in any way of the people that I'm interviewing. I would just really, and certainly not embodying it. It's not like embodying to create a new character. It's reenacting what was told to me. So I'm very specific where the words and the story is going to be taking me. I'm very specific with what is being said and what was told to me, which in the delivery changes it and would make it more of an enactment.
Mm-hmm. And is that different in the video when you're costume? It's probably, is that just what you're wearing when you're in this film, this video, and there's a side-by-side moment where you're talking two different people's stories. One's in Michigan and the one before is probably Ohio. It's Ohio, and the woman's talking about the Republican voter or candidate party. It was something, a Republican event.
They were watching one of the debates. They wanted to watch one of the debates, at a local eatery. Yeah. Those are two different ones. I mean, I didn't go too elaborate. COVID, I couldn't have the costume person I usually work with me.
Okay.
I mean, it ends up being kind of pragmatic, but then the pragmatism brought about a choice of how minimum to keep it. So if it's one article of the one character just had glasses on her head, if it was one thing that would help in shifting between characters, in addition to slight camera differences, but that only happened in two of the interviews, where there was just a slight camera variation due to the tool that I was using. So I mixed cameras and cell phones, and that would be the only indicator for yeah, having a character change. Would be that little prop, difference of a prop, what I could fit into the window, how I adapted to the zoomed environment.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it's a series, as you're speaking about the making of it too, it just seems like this is such a series of situations and tools that came and lined up in a way that created this very of the moment, video that we would have not, it would have looked very different. And probably, I don't know, I mean, do you think it would have been more kind of a studio shot or documentary sort of street conversation that you'd be in different locations?
Oh, for sure. I mean, yeah, for sure. COVID changed it. I adapted and I found it. Second time I reference fluxes, but I just wanted to play. And some of my other work, there's some live performances where I do purposely use rules, like the rule is love. So yeah, this just set up a circumstance, set up a particular setup. So how do you adapt when I was just curious about how am I going to adapt based on these limitations. So they're not limitations, because if you limit yourself too much, then you don't do it. You're like, oh, I can't do it because I need this, and I didn't want to fall into that.
Do you think you'll ever use some of these tools again when you don't have to? Do you think it'll change your work going forward?
That's a funny question.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I have been
to
changed by it. I know I have been changed by this process. I have. There's different things I want to do now, because this was as bare as you could get, considering, but still making it possible. So, I mean, now I kind of know things that I don't want to do. So I guess that'll lead me to the type of larger productions that I would like to do. Because now I'm curious, well, how would it be with people in the room interacting and us working off each other and having to work together to film this shot? How different would it be? And then what would I be able to retain from my work, from the practice that I've already been doing? How can I balance and retain aspects of it that I really enjoy doing in these new set of circumstances? Is interesting for me to and I've begun exploring.
So we do have a question from Kelly Williams. She notes that she also had a similar experience of reading Parable of the Sower recently, where she kind of had to step away from it because of what was happening around us. And she asked, did you find yourself having to walk away from this project at times for self-care as well? And what was your experience of creating this film while simultaneously experiencing the trauma of the events from the film? And I would also tack onto that. I've been thinking about the emotional labor that often so many of the essential workers that you portray are offering, or perhaps they're being forced to offer during this experience. And so, like, I'm thinking about emotional labor that the artist offers as well.
I mean, ooh, 2020, I mean, there were just times where I would just like start crying. I was just doing the laundry, just start crying because of the especially in the spring, with the ambulance going all day long, so I mean, for me, being able to do this work for me was what I needed to do in order to make sense of everything that was occurring. And I guess that's also what the video in itself, how present I'm in it, is how am I making sense of these incidents that go by really fast, aren't in sync to each other, are kind of like just cut off, just kind of pop in with all this different type of information flow. Like for me, the video in itself is trying to make sense of all this input, all this stimuli that was occurring. So, the video in itself ended up being a process of doing care, because I was able to process, not make sense, because you can't make sense of any of this. These crazy events, it is life that has happened. So what are you learning from it that will help inform you in your future journeys? Is something that, particularly seeing the exhibition again and going through the dates of each image in a chronological order, certainly present in when I think back on that work just last year.
Well, I think that holding your own attention on the people that you embodied to make the photographs or to interview for the video, it makes me happy that it was healing for you, because I think that could be, as Kelly and Leah pointed out, very, very exhausting work.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but I mean, yeah, yes, thank you. Because it was exhausting, but I mean, 2020 wasn't. I mean, it had to be exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
Exhausting for all of us, having to make such different changes all the time. But
I mean,
yeah, happy I did it.
Alternatively, like, could you have made work about anything else living through this moment? Would it have been possible for you to?
I mean, a lot of people did. It was an interesting resurgence of work in nature, artwork in nature. I noticed people, going out into their environments and doing projects or doing pieces because of the need to go outside. So, I mean, that certainly has been and was on my mind. But in particular, for me, no. I mean, so no. I could not have done anything else at this time. But other people did, and that was interesting, because that was healing for them, making work about something else, use the imagination to go somewhere else, not to escape. I don't think any of the art that I saw that resonated with me, that did not deal with any of these three topics directly, were escaping from anything. It was more of using your imagination to create something new, or using your imagination just to redirect your focus enough so that it becomes a moment of self-care, just so that you can experience something else and then step back into the world. Those a mini break, but a functional mini break, always aware of what was going on. The better examples that I saw. So.
Do you have anything new on the horizon that you would like to share with us, or?
Yeah, and right now yes, there some of the work at Moore will be traveling in a show with Drexel University and elsewhere. So stay tuned for that on the socials. I have I'll be on a panel October 3rd as part of the, it was organized by a group of Indigenous women from Brazil and the University of London, but it's for the Anarchist Bookstore's annual kind of conference that's taking place online. So that'll be occurring October 3rd. Watch out for the socials. I'll be speaking more from my role as an organizer with the North Bronx Collective, which is a group of, we're a group of women who came together as a response, rapid response, in March 2020 to as a mutual aid group, and we've gone from mutual aid group thinking deeper about what mutual aid is into doing remediation in a green space that's been abandoned by New York City Parks, and we were locked out. So all this is also happening while the making of the video. So I'll be speaking about our work on that panel, which seems to be like an awesome panel, really looking at green spaces and urban spaces in New York City. So that's what's coming up. And then, yeah, just look at the socials. Just follow me on social media.
I should also add that Lynn and Alicia will be on a panel together at Moore on October 13th, for those of you who are in Philadelphia. They'll be discussing the role of artists as researchers. So if you all want to come back to enjoy that conversation, we would love to have you. That's happening in person.
Oh, I did not know you were on that panel, Alicia. That's really interesting. I'm very honored. And I mean, we are very fortunate to have you for such an extended period of time interacting with Moore's community too, because I just think there are so many permutations of impact from the gallery to the screening to, I've seen you on panels in different contexts too, but that'll be an interesting one because my research is very different, not unpolitical, but the results are very different too. So it should be a good panel then, because you'll see research and how it impacts different practices in really dramatically different ways.
Absolutely.
Yes, I'm sure.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I'm so day to day. I know what I'm doing tomorrow, but I don't know.
We have lots to look forward to. Yeah.
Oh, that's a nice positive note.
Yeah. So it looks like we're through with Q&A. It doesn't look like anyone has anything else to tack on at the end here. So I'd just really like to thank both of you, Alicia and Lynn. Thank you so much for your time tonight. Alicia, thank you for your generosity and sharing this important work with us. And Lynn, we are so grateful for your insightful questions and observations. We're excited to have you here at Moore. And thank you most importantly to all of you who have tuned in and participated in this conversation. It's really wonderful to have you here, even if it is virtually. So I'd like to just take a moment to remind everyone that if you haven't yet had the opportunity to see Alicia's work in person in the galleries, from March to June at Home with Essential Workers is on view through Saturday, September 25th. So there is still time. Yeah, so I hope you all enjoyed the program and the opportunity to contribute to this important dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lynn.